Hi, everyone. Um, Yesterday, I asked in LinkedIn whether you would like me to do an article or review of the newly created and published RIMS risk maturity model. And most of you said, yes, you would like to see an article. Some of you said you would like to see a video, but I'm too lazy to write an article, so I decided to do this live broadcast and then save this as a video. So let's quickly check if the sound and the video quality is okay. Can you please write something in the comments? Say hello, say where you're watching from, so I can see. Thanks, Mohammed. Um, So today I wanted to break down and just kind of go through step by step, discuss the latest RIMS risk maturity model, and then you can decide whether you want to use it for your business. So first of all, a little bit of an introduction. Um, I probably more than 10 years ago, I was part of a team, a global team of about, I think, 16 people. Um, Hi, Christian. I was part of the global team of about 16 people who created the PwC internal risk maturity model, and then that was kind of used for selling risk maturity models and performance services internally. And I remember I was doing together with a couple of other people. Hi, Cynthia. Together with other people, I was doing some training in Paris for the PwC officers. And this is something that I'm still very much ashamed of because that was just risk management one in its purest form. It was absolutely evil. Since then, I've created a very different lessons learned maturity model for the Auditor General Office, and that model actually became the foundation for the maturity model that has been used for the last 4 years, 3 or 4 years, I can't remember, together with Deloitte CIS to perform annual risk maturity assessments for the large non-financial corporations across CIS. And um, I also took part, I also participated in the G31,000 risk maturity model development. So all in all, I've created / played a part in at least 3 different maturity models. And every time I've kind of taken away a lesson from that. So I'll try and share that with you. I'll try and look at the RIMS risk maturity model through that lens of experience. And kind of quick hint before we continue, my current conclusion is that risk maturity models are a waste of time. They're fundamentally wrong in the approach to integrating and implementing risk management too. And they're nothing more than a marketing consulting exercise. They look good, but they're really a waste of time because to develop a roadmap for risk management implementation, you don't need a risk maturity model for that. So that being said, let's have a look at what RIMS have updated. Now, I remember the previous risk maturity model, I think it was developed by one of the software vendors, and it was just horrendous. It was probably one of the worst things I've ever seen in risk management. It was just this poorly educated risk management one. So they claim, and including people who I know from RIMS, claim that this has been a major rethink and very much in line with the kind of current risk-based decision-making line of thinking. So let's see. Okay, two fundamental principles in developing any kind of risk maturity model. First one is McKinsey's Messe. mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So the problem with maturity models in general, any kind of assessment model, is that it's actually quite difficult to avoid duplication and make sure all of the points are of the same hierarchical level. So the model has to be complete and not contradictory and not repetitive. That's the basic general principle, and we will see whether they've managed to achieve that. And then the second principle that I've discovered over the years of building and revising and refreshing maturity models is that the more granularity you have, the more difficult is the task of keeping it collectively exhaustive and mutually exclusive. And that's why, for example, in every single maturity model that I've been doing over the last 10 years, I try to keep it to at least, at most, 3 levels of maturity. Because the more levels of maturity you have, the more granularity you have. It looks sexier, but it's actually almost impossible methodologically to do something that makes sense and that there's enough distinction between different levels. So in that quest for traditional marketing, so to say, many organizations kind of just gave up on common sense and just user friendliness in the pursuit of having a risk maturity that has many levels. And so if you're watching us, this is a live session, so you can ask questions and I'll see them and I'll try and respond. So let's have a look at the first, messy. And it's interesting how the logic of the model, all in all, the logic of the model is very simple. And you can access it by, let me just quickly type in the comments the link, and I'll post it in the description of this broadcast. There's a link to the model as well. Do check it out by all means. RIMS put a lot of effort into doing this. So let's have a look. First test: have they passed it messy? What they've done is they have 5 sections. Hi, Raphael. Thank you for joining. They have 5 sections, and then each section has a set of questions that relate to that section. So the first very simple test is, are the 5 sections messy? Are they collectively exhaustive, mutually exclusive? And so we're looking at strategy alignment. I guess it's integration into strategic planning and some other decision making. Culture and accountability. Yeah, so far so good. Risk management capabilities, I guess could have been part of culture, but still not too bad. If you're saying that culture and accountability is the first line of defense, and then risk management capability is the second line of defense, I guess you could have broken it down that way. Risk governance, now that we'll see what sort of questions are inside, because that title makes no sense, and it's not clear how it's distinguished from the other areas, because it could have been culture and accountability, and it could have been in strategy alignment. And then analytics is a definite no-no, because and analytics is just a kind of, I guess, a set of techniques that are used to integrate into culture, performance management, strategy, and decision making. So analytics seems very out of place in this structure. So we'll see how that goes. My initial, and I mean, I've read every single question in preparing for this video. So my conclusion is that's a big fail on the messy part. There's a lot of duplication, and it's pretty inconsistent, where like you're actually surprised to see certain questions in certain groups, in certain categories. So that seems to me a bit artificial and pretty random. But it's not the worst thing. So fail on the messy part, which is important because you want products that you develop to be very crystal clear and simple to understand and simple to apply and simple to sell and to explain to stakeholders and decision makers. And this is It looks simple, as in it's 5 categories, 6 questions in the first category, for example, and but the categories itself themselves are not crystal clear. So that could lead to some very unfortunate conversations and unnecessary conversations. By the way, if you've missed the risk awareness special charity event that was happening last week, you can still watch all replays at the Risk Academy YouTube channel and at the website charity.riskawarenessweek.com. And don't forget to support the victims of the war in Ukraine by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen consistently to donate. Or you can choose any charity that you want. I've just chosen some international charity that allows donations from literally any country in the world, World Vision International. And it goes specifically to the refugees. So on the first point, fail on the messy. Now let's have a look at the next point. Have they been able to achieve that distinction between, hi Ademir, that distinction between the first level of maturity, which is basically nothing, nobody does nothing, which is, by the way, completely made up, because there's never an organization that does nothing. It may be doing something, some sort of risk analysis informally, but there's physically does not exist an organization that does no risk analysis. So that just shows how academic the authors of the risk maturity model are. And so there are 5 levels. I mean, it's typical. I've read all the responses, and it was very artificial how the maturity levels were broken down, and they're very inconsistently broken down. So in my mind, that's a second fail. In terms of too many options, and the options are not even that distinguishable. Sometimes they would just add a couple of words to differentiate answer 4 and answer 5, and these words were completely artificial. So they have no deep meaning or reason behind it. So to me, it's a fail on messy. It's a fail on the kind of the flow between the maturity levels. But let's have a look at the questions. Hi Sirius, hi Orlando, thank you for joining. Do ask questions, make your comments. If somebody has already seen or read or studied the maturity model, by all means join it. Okay, first one, how is risk considered in strategic decision making? Okay, seems like it's a very reasonable question. Definitely the right direction to go is I'm honestly not sure why they would narrow it down to strategic decision making, because budgeting, forecasting, operational planning, investment decision making, procurement decision making, pricing decision making, sales and credit decision making, all of these are examples of risk management. Maintenance, budgeting, maintenance planning, equipment replacement, logistical routes. All of these examples of where you would want to integrate risk management. So let's see if they kind of, that's why I say messy is so important. You have to capture the whole field of application of risk management. Martin, hi, thank you for watching on YouTube. If they say strategic here, maybe the following questions then cover everything else. Trick question, they're not. It's kind of just this, and then a couple of other bits and pieces mentioned along the way. So this is pretty random. Okay, now here, how I normally, and I've reviewed dozens of maturity models in my life. So to determine whether a maturity model is a good one, it's actually it's basically just necessary to look at the best option. You just look at the last column. And that's why in the beginning, when I said I think maturity models are just an outdated marketing tool and they have no real kind of practical application. Because for you to develop a roadmap for an organization, all you really need to know is the baseline, kind of the benchmark, the good state, the perfect state, and then you scale back from that. And so when I say scale, I don't mean you have multiple levels of doing bits and pieces. I'm saying this is what risk management should look like, and then everything else is basically not risk management. And that's another lie that consultants and auditors have sold us, that somehow you could be level 3 maturity and your risk management is bad, but somehow that is okay because you're a non-for-profit and you're in a small organization. That's really not true. That is just a lie. You either have risk management or you don't. Um, there's no middle ground. Thanks, Norman. Um, I do remember liking your maturity model. I'll be honest, I don't remember the details because it's been ages since I've read your book. But when I was recommending in our courses, I was recommending maturity models. Yours and Grant Purdy's were the kind of the two prime examples. Um, that being said, in the last 3 or 4 years, I think my thinking kind of moved way beyond maturity models, and I no longer, I have my own maturity model, and I don't use it except that only the last column, which is this is your best state, and this is what good risk management should look like, and then everything else is basically just not risk management. So let's have a look at the best option. They're saying, is risk considered in strategic decision making? Now, so first of all, I very much dislike the phrasing of every single question, maybe with an exception of a couple, but I very much dislike most questions, how they're phrased. Because how is risk considered in strategic decision making? It is considered one way or another. And there are so many unique ways of considering risks in strategic decision making that it is almost impossible to say which is good and which is not good form of consideration. Just the way question is phrased, it's kind of pushing you towards answering that everything is good. And this is the situation for most questions. The way questions are phrased, they almost guarantee that no matter what your organization does in terms of risk management, even if there's no risk management at all, you can still claim that risks are considered as part of strategic decision making because they always are. Informally, even formally, doing a couple of scenarios, that's also a form of consideration. So the wording of the questions, I think, is not particularly what's the word I'm looking for? Not particularly, not lucky. Just it's the selection of words is weird. It opens up too much to interpretation, and I tried to put my hat on of the current, the previous organization where I used to work, which was very mature in terms of every decision that they make, and put the hats of some other organizations that took quite a formal, bureaucratic, tick the box approach to risk management. And both of those organizations would answer the same, 5. But let's have a look at the wording of the question, of the answer. Process exists to review and approve risk consideration and assessment processes for future decision making, as well as using formal process for considering risks in pre-active and post decision making. This is the 4th problem. So, I've read the whole thing and I saw a lot of problems. Problem 1, not messy. Problem 2, too many options that are not distinguishable enough. Problem 3, the questions are worded in a way that anybody can be a 5. And then problem 4, 5, I've read and reread that sentence. And, even though English is my second language, I have been speaking English for many, many years, and I consider myself being quite fluent at understanding the meaning. To me, this is just a random collection of words. Um, and this is not even the worst example. It looks like it was just kind of, written by 10 different people, and everybody tried to put in some keywords. It's all kind of buzzwords lumped together. I have no idea. Basically, what I'm trying to say, I have no idea what this means. I don't understand what this option answer 5 will look like in practice. It's just so ambiguously vague and generic, and instead of being concrete and kind of practical and precise, it's using this consulting BS marketing language that you can't really picture it in your mind. So these are the 4 problems in my mind. Let me quickly address the question. That's the Norman. Yes, I agree. That's the theory. I mean, that's the sales pitch that I have used many times as well. The reality is, it's not. The journey of risk management is not in the levels of maturity that the model is describing, or any maturity model is describing. The maturity of risk management in the decisions that have been modified to become risk-based. So, for example, I started with investment process, and then investment process became risk-based. And then I started looking at insurance, and then insurance became risk-based. And then investment started dropping off, and so it stopped being risk-based. And then insurance became very risk-based. And then I started looking at procurement next, and then in parallel, insurance and procurement both became quite risk-based. That's how kind of implementation goes in real life. It's not in the shape of what the model is proposing. And also, I can't even remember any value in saying, oh, you're 3, but you want to be 5. Everybody needs to be 5. That's what I'm trying to say, that there are no grades of maturity in risk management outside of pure marketing sense. It's either you have risk management or you don't. Or you don't do risk management well. Either you do risk management well or you don't do risk management well. And that is the question for every single process, because you can do risk management well for the board decisions, and you can do it super bad for maintenance, or you can do it exceptionally well for budgeting and very poorly for sales and credit limits, and so on. So I used to probably use the same arguments as you, but in my practical application, I found that those arguments just don't hold when being discussed with the actual shareholders and stakeholders. Okay, so next question, and I'll try and speed it up because there are a lot of questions. How forward-looking is your risk management horizon? I mean, I don't know what that question means, because the question by itself is nonsense. What do you mean, how forward is your risk management horizon? Whatever the decision at hand, whatever the process, if we're doing risk analysis for budgeting purposes, then guess what the horizon is. If we're doing for an investment decision that has 30 years in the NPV model, then guess what the horizon there is. If you're doing a credit risk analysis for a client who buys your product and he has to pay within 90 days, well, then guess what the horizon there is. So that, to think that there is some sort of horizon that risk management across the board should be aligned with, I mean, that's pretty silly. And let's have a look at the best option that the authors are proposing. And they're saying horizon incorporates consideration of dynamic nature of risk, including interdependencies as well as compounding and cascading effects. Now, that again is just a collection of buzzwords. I mean, this is meaningless. It doesn't really relate to the question at hand. All it's saying is whatever the risk is, the horizon is aligned with the risk, and you should take care of correlation and effects of how one risk may trigger other risks and so on. I mean, okay, would you ever do it any other way? Isn't that kind of a given? So that to me is a weird question that requires weird answer, because I cannot think of an organization that would not have a 5 in this question. Even if you're doing qualitative, some silly heat maps or something, you still, when you are describing the risk, you're still considering how risks are related. And this, for example, doesn't say anything that the correlations have to be mathematically represented. It just says they are, and there always are. Like, there's never a situation where it's not a 5 for this question. Let's have a look at the next one. How are risks for strategic initiative or investment, acquisition, new product evaluated? Okay, how are risks evaluated? Which is weird, because how is risk considered for strategic decision making is the same that how are risks for strategic initiative or investment evaluated. Considered, evaluated, what's the difference? Like that's not the terminology that even ISO uses, so it's just made up words. And somehow we should be thinking that these two questions are different and not overlapping. I don't get it. Marilyn is asking, how from your practical experience, how effective are internal auditors in assessing risk management processes, and what are they not doing and why? Okay, thank you, Marion. This is a wonderful question. I've had a lot of experience with different internal auditors trying to make judgments about the effectiveness of risk management, and they were horrible. They were absolutely, and the last experience I had about a month ago, and that was just pure embarrassment. Internal auditors are not competent enough to comment on the effectiveness of risk management, because if you really want to talk about the maturity of risk management and you want to talk about effectiveness, then you should be talking about model risk. You should be talking about confidence interval, back tests, whether risk analysis actually forecasts the risks as they happen. It has a predictive power, it has the sufficient quality of information to make decisions, and it allows quality mitigations. Internal auditors, well, at least I'm yet to meet an internal auditor who has competencies in any of those topics. And in fact, my last experience with internal auditor was probably the most painful experience ever, because yes, he first, the director, he sent the junior staff, and when I say junior, I mean the level of staff, but he wasn't junior. And he was clueless, completely clueless, because he was saying that he was like commenting on the number of columns in the risk register, that kind of stupidity that has nothing to do with the actual underlying understanding of risk. But then when the boss came, and I was very patiently trying to explain that you shouldn't send staff who are unqualified to comment on risk. I'll never forget that phrase. The head of internal audit said, that is your opinion, and we have a different opinion. And I said, oh, wonderful. My opinion is based on international standards and science. And what is your opinion based on? He said his opinion was based on something he saw at the previous workplace, which I, by the way, know is not really famous for good risk management, because I know their whole risk management team. And so, yeah, it's weird. Unfortunately, I wouldn't rely too much on internal audits. The reason being that Global Institute of Internal Auditors have published a lot of papers on how to audit risk management. And I've done a separate videos on that. These papers by the Global Institute of the Internal Auditors are horrible. They're an absolute disgrace at describing how to audit risk management. So I'm not, I was disappointed talking to internal auditors, but I wasn't surprised, because the guidance that they use is written by same incompetent people. Okay, how are risks for strategic initiative and investment evaluated? Okay, let's have a look. Risks for strategic initiative or investment are evaluated continuously from early in the approval process with the risk treatment. Okay, so let's dissect the first part of the sentence. Risks are evaluated continuously. I mean, that comes back to my comment is that any organization, no matter what you do, will always get a 5 in this maturity model, which to me is a fundamental flaw in the design. Because what initiative or what project or what investment is not regularly discussed and issues are kind of picked up and identified and reviewed at every stage gate or periodically, whatever the kind of the decision-making process is. So continuously evaluated, because it doesn't say how they evaluated, every initiative and every investment on the planet is continuously evaluated because we don't know what continuously is or how it should be evaluated. So that's a pretty meaningless statement. And then the second part of the sentence, a treatment plan exists. Okay, that's also a given in any kind of decision, any kind of investment. There's a rollout plan, implementation plan. There's some sort of decisions that are made. There's a work breakdown structure. There's a schedule, budget. There are some sort of plans of action. And surprise, surprise, treatments, they may not be all treatments, but there are some treatments are always incorporated into that. So if you have a decision on the paper, if you have an investment on the paper, then of course it has a treatment plan. Does it address all of the risks? We don't know, but this doesn't really say. It just says that risk treatment plan is routinely executed, which of course it is. So this is again an example of by using these generic consulting BS words, these empty kind of slogans, anyone would get a 5. I cannot even imagine somebody not getting a 5 in this question. I mean, unless of course they have an objective to purposefully show that they're mature and they need resources to suddenly become mature. So anyway, this is super weird. Okay, let's have a look at another comment. The word strategic is thrown around way too often. Yes. Yes, but I mean it's less important to the point I'm trying to make, is that if you're saying strategic, then you have to also mention all the other. Or if you say any decision making, then you're covering the whole the whole area. Yes, the second part of the question is good. A lot of maturity being described is just basically trying to highlight some areas of concern that need to be investigated. It's a red, yellow, green. Dependencies in the dependencies. Sure. I mean, again, try and maybe paraphrase your comment in a more simple, tangible, practical way, because dependencies and interdependencies, these are just empty words that are thrown around. I mean, this could mean anything. Basically, what you're saying could mean anything. And what I'm trying to say is that your comment may be very spot on, or it could be just consulting talk, throwing it out there. And I can't, by using the language which is not simple in English, I cannot, and I mean conversational, plain English, I cannot figure out what you mean. I have to guess. And whenever people guess, whenever executives guess, when we risk managers talk mumbo jumbo, they always guess not in our favor. I mean, I think that should be a given now. Okay, next. How consistently are risk appetite and tolerance expectations used to guide decision making? I mean, interesting. Let's have a look at the whether the best option, the ultimate option, actually provides any valuable insight into what the person doing the maturity assessment should actually look like. And they're basically saying, as long as risk appetite and tolerance levels, limits, are formally expressed in a statement and discussed at the board, you're mature, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, first of all, risk appetite kind of makes sense if you're a regulated business and you have some sort of capital adequacy requirements. If you don't have capital adequacy requirements from the regulator, but the shareholder for some reason wants it to check against covenants, you have a very leveraged company, then maybe it makes sense aggregating all risks into into risk capital adequacy requirements, i.e. risk appetite. And sometimes it's probably beneficial to have some other non-financial metrics as your risk appetite, your zero tolerances for safety and compliance and sanctions and bribery and etc. etc. In general, I've seen a number of organizations trying to kind of repeat the financial services banking approach to risk appetite. It was a lot of effort and very little, if any, value for the actual business. It's a nice picture. The statements, risk appetite statements, are nice pictures to look at, but they're not particularly practical. Nor do they fundamentally change how decisions are made. Because if you really wanted to change decisions, then you would integrate your risk appetite into policies, but board level policies. And surprise, surprise, most of the time it's already there. Your health and safety policy already says you have zero tolerance and zero harm. Your compliance and anti-bribery policies already say that there's zero tolerance. So all of those risk appetites have been captured forever. You don't need a separate statement for that, technically speaking. And then on the practical level, limits for the risks that can be linked to stop loss, to some sort of trigger and action, they're quite useful. So for market, so for price risk, foreign exchange risk, maybe interest rate risk, for credit risk limits, these are quite valuable applications of risk appetite. But none of this is covered in this point. So in a practical sense, risk appetite is something completely different to what is described here. Here it just says, do the risk appetite statements like everybody else does, get them signed off at the board or some other level, and you're mature, which of course is not even close to being the truth. Okay, next question. To what extent are enterprise risk management capabilities viewed by your organization? I mean, I don't know if an English speaker wrote this, because I don't understand what this means in English. Like, this is just such a convoluted language that it just makes no sense to me. That's one point. And second point, it says capabilities, but don't we have capabilities here? And culture and accountability, isn't it capability here? And what about risk governance? So this is just an example of how messy and random this placement of questions is. So where were we? To what extent are enterprise risk capabilities viewed by organization? I have no idea what this question means. It's meaningless collection of words. Enterprise risk capabilities are viewed as a competitive advantage, really, focused on optimizing risk-reward trade-offs for all key risks by most leaders in the organization. From the response, from the answer text, it didn't become much clearer. I still have no idea what this question is about, and I don't understand what this question implies. What is the practical application of this answer? Because I know what optimizing risk-reward trade-off is. That's an efficient frontier. That's a mathematical thing that you can do for many investment decisions. That's a very powerful tool with some methodological limitations, obviously. But the general idea of making decisions as a selection, as a trade-off between different options, instead of just selecting a single option, and appreciating the uncertainty and the stochastic nature of the corporate world, that's a good thing. I can't really connect what I seen in practice with whatever this text means. So I don't know what the intention was there. Okay, describe the next question and the last question in this category. Describe the extent to which your organization considers risk to its business model. That's an interesting one, because I don't know what it is, what does it mean to consider risks to the business model? Because literally any risk that the corporation is facing is a risk to the business model. So how is that then different from this question about strategic initiative and investment and strategic decision making? To me, it's completely unclear how this question is somehow different, unique, and not repetitive from the two previous ones. And I don't even know what it means to consider risks to the business model. Does that mean annual budget? Because you see, considering risks in a vacuum for the sake of considering risks to the business model, technically it can be done. You sit down and you're trying to analyze the business assumptions, and you take the business plan, and you come up with a view of what are the risks affecting the business model and how these risks will affect the business model, and whether you forecast the certain risks to increase and so on. Technically, it can be done, but this is so stupid. Like, this is the pure risk management one approach, where we sit down to figure out risks. Why don't we instead do risk management two, where you have your business model or business plan? You don't really have a business model. Business model is such an abstract thing, but and we have to base our risk analysis. We have to attach our risk analysis to some concrete documents. So you have a business plan, you have a budget, you have a production plan, you have maintenance budget, you have investment financial model and investment memorandum, and then you can attach risks to that. So you can risk management too. You wouldn't do a risk analysis around the business plan just for the sake, kind of randomly throughout the year, for the sake of doing the risk analysis to the business model. You would actually wait for the next cycle of the business plan, and then you would create the next year's business plan, hence business model, I guess, risk adjusted. So you would already consider what are the different volatile assumptions, you would run different scenarios, you would simulate certain uncertainties, you would add risk events to it, and you would add some uncertain scenarios into the business plan. And then, of course, you would figure out that your business plan has a very low probability of being achieved, or the targets met, and then you would come up with a set of recommendations, mitigations, and then you would recalculate your business plan with those mitigations already incorporated, the effect and the costs incorporated. So that is a simple, tangible thing to do, which seems quite natural for businesses to do, even though in reality, again, like this is something that academics and consultants have no clue about, is that in fact, in reality, business plans most of the time are very politically motivated. So integrating risk management into this politically motivated tag of war, when people are deciding, when executives are trying to divvy up the resources, the limited resources, the limited capital, is a very unfortunate, I don't know what's the word, not a fruitless, but a very difficult exercise to pull off, because the executives want the last person they want to see is the risk manager trying to run some scenarios and simulations on the business plan specifically, because business plans are super politicized. So not sure about this. The question is weird. The answer is pretty meaningless. Business model risks are analyzed to challenge, test, anticipate changes to underlying assumptions, okay, with the intent to improve or transform the business model or strategies. Yes, but then on one side, any organization does that, because this doesn't say anything about how it should be done, when it should be done, how often it should be done. So any organization can claim that it's done one way or another. And then the second big point is what I mentioned, that this doesn't describe how, when, and how integrated this should be done. It just says in the vacuum, business model risks are analyzed. And analyzing business model risks in a vacuum, that's risk management one. That is bad risk management because it's not actually leading to the change in the business plan, in the budget, or in the strategic initiatives identified. So, not very promising. Let's have a look at another one. And I know I've been online already for 45 minutes. So I'm going to quickly run through another one, but it's basically the same throughout. The questions are pretty random. The way questions are phrased most of the time is meaningless. It's just some weird selection of words. Even the terminology used is not even consistent with international standards. And ISO 31000 is still officially recognized as a standard in US. But even if for some bizarre reason they decided to somehow align it with COSO, it's not even aligned with COSO either. So weird. And then questions, too many, not distinguishable enough. And the number 5, which is our baseline, basically, this is where we always look at this. You look at number 5 and you say, is this how I want to see risk management done in my organization, if I imagine my organization being the most mature? And the simple answer is no. The simple answer is no, because most of the time it's actually unclear what this option 5 even means. Okay, to what extent do results of the risk assessment affect changes in initiatives, project, and strategy? Weird, because it kind of correlates with all the previous questions about strategic planning initiatives and business model. Because what this basically is saying, because this is an example of how it's important to use English, the proper, simple, straightforward English. Because what this question is really asking is, does the risk analysis have an effect on the decisions or documents or business plans that were the subject of the risk analysis? And then the answer is simple. It does or it doesn't. It does often or it does rarely, and so on. So let's have a look what it says here. Actions taken by owners of initiatives, projects, and strategies to manage risk are considered as part of performance evaluation. What the hell does that mean? How is performance evaluation suddenly part of the response, because it wasn't really part of the question? How does that relate? And why would anybody, regardless of what sort of risk management they do, choose an answer anything but 5? So disappointing. To what extent do employees and other stakeholders contribute directly in some way to the collection of risk information? Okay, this one's weird. Why collection? Should they not be involved in assessment? Should they not be involved in mitigation? Does that mean that the following questions will be about assessment and mitigation? No, they're not. Why? Because this is just this is an example of kind of this random question taken out of context, thrown in there, and it doesn't really relate to the whole story. You can't build a puzzle, because all of these kind of random pieces of puzzle, they don't really fold into a single coherent picture. Coherent, is that the word? Okay, so to what extent employees and other stakeholders contribute directly in some way to the collection of risk information? I don't know what this means. Like, everyone contributes something. It says in some way. So I would imagine that we would always answer yes, in some way. Everybody always contributes somehow, because the question itself is pretty mental. Okay, engagement for collecting risk information extends to include ecosystem of customers, suppliers, industry peers, and others. Okay, I can kind of see what they've done here. Is they've said what kind of stakeholders are involved in the risk identification. And the best answer is basically everybody extending beyond just the management and the executives and the board members, but also to the suppliers, customers, industry peers, and so on. In practical reality, that's wishful thinking. Only some successful pockets where we get some data from suppliers, we get some data. For example, for insurance purposes, we got a lot of data from suppliers because we didn't have enough claim data, our own claim data, to model the risk profile properly. So we were collecting data. So again, with this answer, you can answer 5 pretty much regardless of what your organization actually does, because there will always be some examples where there are pockets of good practices of collaborating with customers, suppliers, industry peers. I mean, that's a given. We all go to risk management conferences. I presume you've all watched Risk Awareness Week at least once over the last 3 years. And that's collaborating with industry peers. And I mean, they share a lot of you would answer yes to this question as well. And no organization on the planet can brag that they're doing it across the board consistently all the time. So it's a weird choice of the question and words. To what extent do risk consideration influence leadership? Again, I don't know what this practically means. I mean, to me, this is just a collection of kind of random slogans. Risk considerations occur before, during, and after strategic and operational decisions are taken. This is a perfect example of very poorly structured maturity model, because we've had this before, during, and after already. In one of the responses here, let's have a look here. Pre, active, and post decision making, same thing. So that's just sloppy composition. You have repetitive questions, repetitive answers, and the questions are so vague and ambiguously worded that I have no idea what they actually mean. I mean, I have to think. When I was reading it, and I've read it twice, I had to think really, really hard to pull out something practical and kind of build those bridges. And I can guarantee the bridges that I've built would be completely different to the bridges that you've built between the words that they've used and the practical application. Nicholas is saying that the scales that they use, they're pretty much similar to the nature of our traditional and completely wrong approach to ranking likelihood and consequence for heat maps. So thank you for that comment. I completely agree. I mean, it's just it's pretty random. But the second point is very important, because when I read all the questions and I've answered, and so I cast my mind to the next step, and the next step is always, well, now I have to turn this into a practical roadmap, because maturity by itself is a waste of time, because you already know you already know basically where you need to improve, and your deliverable is not a maturity assessment. It's kind of fun to show executives, and even some executives. I heard stories that some executives like to see that they're 3, but they want to be 5. I've worked with executives that would literally kill me on the spot if I even mention something like that, because they're saying, what is this nonsense? We need good risk management. What is this 3-5? Get lost. So yes, that would never be a conversation in my life. And what I need is a deliverable, a tangible deliverable, which is, here are 5 things that we need to do to improve risk management to become world class, as Norman Marx calls it. And I completely agree with you, Nicholas, because after reading and answering all the questions, I didn't have enough ammunition. And I did I casted the assessment on the company where I used to work. And I didn't have enough ammunition to give me solid actions that need to be implemented, because the questions were so generic and targeting completely the wrong areas of effective risk management, that at the end I got nothing. I've got a pretty picture saying I'm 5 across the board, and I've got nothing. I've got no roadmap which I can then take and start implementing for the next a year or so. So yes, in that way, I completely agree. Okay, how is risk culture and oversight and accountability demonstrated? That's a good question. It's a very simple, kind of generic, there's very little to criticize on this question. Let's have a look at the answer. Risk culture is agile, enabling an organization proactive accountability and capability to adapt to a dynamic ecosystem. If I wanted, like if I was in a lift with PwC, Deloitte, EY, and KPMG, and we were playing a bullshit competition, that is the answer that they would give me collectively. Because this is just such a collection of random words that somehow mean something different to every person, and this is just like this is your marketing brochure 101 nonsense that consultants talk in. This is useless. I mean, I would be executed if I showed this to any executive ever. Okay, what type of connection exists between performance evaluation and managing risk? Again, weirdly phrased, but you're basically trying to understand because again, very bad use of English language. Because the real question is performance evaluated and rewarded based on the risk information? Is it risk adjusted? Because you get bonuses and you get reporting usually on non-risk adjusted figures. And when you risk adjust certain numbers, the performance usually significantly drops because you realize that part of the result was just luck or uncertainty or market forces outside of the control of the specific management, and management may not necessarily need to be rewarded for that. So the theme is very important. Question worded weirdly, probably many people would not even guess what is implied, that you need to risk-adjusted profit margin or RAROC, risk-adjusted return on capital, or NPV at risk. These are the kind of the physical metrics that you would use in a conversation like that. Write-offs or bad debts compared to CVAR, for example, in credit risk and sales. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. Managing risk is considered a core competency and is included in individual and organization performance evaluations for most levels of management. That is an okay answer, but to a very different question. You see how I've just been describing risk-adjusted performance, and I was talking about something completely different. The fact that risk is a core competency and it should be included in individual performance evaluation, not their corporate performance evaluation, not their kind of physical monetary performance evaluation, is also important, but that's a completely different conversation. And it probably is correct in sitting in this section, but the answer does not match the question at all. Okay, how well do leaders within the organization demonstrate understanding and accountability for managing the top risks of the enterprise? I mean, sure. I mean, not entirely sure why they would just kind of pigeonhole the top risks, but yeah, it's a reasonable question, and it seems to be in the right place. Many of the previous questions weren't in the right place because the theme of that category was completely different. And let's have a look at the answer. Most leaders hold themselves and their employees accountable for managing the top risks, as well as understanding the impact of the aggregate level of risk, where it is concentrated and incorporate risk into decision making. Okay, the first part of the sentence seems fine. Hold themselves and employees accountable. Again, not sure why we would only talk about top risks, but oh well. understand the impact of the aggregate level of risk. I don't know what this means. Again, that's just a kind of collection of random words. Because aggregate level of risk, that's like the corporate risk profile, what cash flow at risk, covenants at risk, like what does that even mean? That's there's no single thing, capital adequacy requirement where you combine VARs from different types of risks like they do in financial services. This just could mean so many things and they're completely different. So unclear what this means. Concentration. I'm I'm not sure why they decided to kind of single out concentration as an aspect of risk profile that is required for the understanding by the leaders. I'm not sure. It's one of those things like you have big point, then kind of minuscule point. It's like somebody kind of somebody was there like, oh, I remember a new fancy word, concentration. Let's put it into the sentence as well, even though it doesn't fit with the rest of the sentence, but it's a cool word. So that's the impression I get. And incorporate risk into decision making. Um, I guess, but then if we talk about integrating risk into decision making, that already was covered 4 questions in 4 questions before. So again, I'm not sure how these questions are consistently linked to one another. Okay, let me have a look at the question in the chat. I'll wrap up in a couple of minutes. So if you have questions, start sending them now. And please type your questions in a short form. You don't need the story. So I don't understand the question about the human factor. Deeper into the situation of the human factor. I don't understand what you mean. Try and paraphrase the question, please, because I understand what the neuroscience tells us about the human perception of risk. I understand the studies into system 1 and system 2 thinking on how we ignore and miscalculate and mistreat risks. But I don't understand what you mean in your question. So please try and paraphrase that. Okay, last question in this section, and the last question of my review, because the rest of it's kind of same, more of the same. Randomly, poorly worded, inconsistent questions where most of the time you can easily, without doing anything, answer 5, because 5s are just kind of collection of some random consulting marketing words. Psychosocial risks, I still don't understand your question. What is the real question? Yeah, please paraphrase the question, which has options to respond. What about the management of psychosocial risks? And I'm not sure psychosocial risks is a thing, because in neuroscience you would probably group the aspects into different categories. Last question. How actively do leaders participate in enterprise or organization-wide risk assessment? Okay, this one I love, because this just shows how far away the authors are still from risk management too. There's still that assumption, and this is what I hate about authors of maturity models. Not only they're pretty bad at seeing what the good risk management should look like, they also phrase the questions that pigeonhole responders into wrong risk management practices. And doing an enterprise or an organization-wide risk assessment, for example, is the worst thing you can possibly do. So asking how active leaders participate, well, I would say, and this is actually true, we had auditors to do this enterprise-wide risk assessment? And my answer would be one, because luckily leaders were smart enough to realize that this was complete waste of time. And they basically just had, okay, that's not true. They had minimal participation. They couldn't get out of the completely, but anybody who could get out, got out of the risk assessment, this enterprise risk assessment completely. So in fact, mature organization would have won, but that's not how the authors view it. The authors think that leaders should actively participate in enterprise risk assessments by volunteering information, different perspectives, providing regular feedback, and requiring risk assessments for major initiatives and strategy planning. So first part, this is just, I mean, come on, did somebody even proofread this? This is just such a inconsistently worded, unstructured product. First part of the sentence implies that there is an enterprise-wide risk assessment. Okay, the authors are completely wrong, that there should be one, and they think that somehow it's a mature thing to have one. It's not. If you wanted to do a holistic picture of the risk, you would do a cash flow at risk, or a business plan at risk, or NPV at risk, or covenants at risk. Any of those applications inside existing business processes gives you the holistic risk profile. Anyway, we don't need an enterprise-wide risk assessment. And then the second part of the sentence, that just makes me crazy, because it says, so they participate and require feedback, and they suddenly require individual risk assessments for major initiatives and strategic planning. But wait a second, didn't we already 5 times answer about strategic initiatives, major initiatives and strategy planning? In fact, I think before that it was strategy initiatives, now it's major initiatives. So this level of inconsistency is just unforgivable for a serious document designed by Risk Management Association. This is like, formatting and proofreading 101. And that second part of the answer has nothing to do with the question, because the question is asking, do they participate in enterprise risk assessments? And the answer is, well, yes, supposedly it's good, which we disagree with, but they think it's okay. And but then suddenly you say, yes, and they also request individual risk assessments for important decisions, which, by the way, is the right thing to do, because we need risk assessments for every important decision or investment. But that just out of the blue. First of all, it repeats 5 times what was already said, and then out of the blue is just here. So this is just too random, too painful for me to continue. Let me quickly answer the last question. If people do not have the commitment and we do not detect it in time, the rest will not work well. Yes, but I don't understand the question. Sure, I mean, as a statement, I agree, but in reality, again, consulting, real life, consulting, real life, need to get to the ground. In reality, you would never have necessary commitment to the decisions. And more importantly, executives are so very good at pretending commitment that you would never find out or detect it in time. And it takes many decisions to pass to figure out whether something is wrong. So how can you mitigate the issue of people not committing to a decision? I don't know. I think the question is too vague to have a proper answer. You have to come up with a specific example, and then we can discuss the solution to that specific example. Because in some instances I couldn't overcome it. In some instances I could overcome it quite easily, but it was always different. For example, what worked for me best was working with the second in command, not the executive, but his next level below, and they're usually much more committed to the decision than the executives themselves. So we did all the good work, And then executives see the result and they can go, fine, whatever. Okay. Not in the last company, but in 2 companies back, we had a joke with one of the board members. We were implementing risk management not with the board, but despite the board, because they had no commitment most of the time. But we found ways of tricking them into better quality decision making. And usually commitment comes from past experience. I've met a number of executives who came from Canadian, US, or Australian and South African corporations where risk-based decision making was a given, and they couldn't even imagine any other way of making decisions before and without doing risk analysis, proper quantitative risk analysis. So finding those individuals that are committed to quality decision making is the second solution. Okay, don't forget to donate. Any other questions? Thoughts, questions? No, looks like we are good. Thank you all for participating, and I'll see you next week. Maybe next week I'll do another one. By the way, if you want me to do a review of something else next week, send me a message. Mohammed, well, you'll have to watch the replay to get an answer to your question, because the answer is I hope you don't, because it is a very what's the word? Premature and inconsistent product. Thanks, everyone. Speak later.